In the quiet rhythm of suburban life, there are things that define a community beyond the sameness of its houses and the uniformity of its rules. For this neighborhood, it was a tree. A massive oak, older than anyone who lived there, had stood, tall in one family's yard for generations. Its roots dug deep into the earth, its branches stretched wide, and its presence gave the property something special in a world of cloned lawns and HOA-mandated exteriors. Children grew up under its shade, neighbors admired its golden leaves in autumn, and families shared countless moments in the cool shelter it provided. But not everyone appreciated it. At the head of the Homeowners Association sat Karen, the president, who thrived on control and conformity. To her, the oak was not a treasure, but a blemish. She complained about the falling leaves, claimed the roots might one day crack the sidewalks, and whispered about the risk of branches breaking in storms. None of her complaints were rooted in reality, but her obsession with order blinded her to the beauty others saw. To her, the tree stood as a challenge to her authority, a defiance of the uniformity she demanded. The family who owned the house never thought Karen would go beyond grumbling. After all, the oak was healthy, regularly inspected and protected by county ordinances that prohibited unnecessary removal of mature trees. It seemed untouchable. But Karen had a history of pushing boundaries, and she believed her role as HOA president granted her the power to decide what belonged and what didn't. The morning came suddenly. Chainsaws roared through the stillness of the neighborhood. The IZ family awoke to the sound, confused and panicked, only to find workers in reflective vests already hacking into the oak's mighty limbs. Branches fell like thunder, scattering across the yard. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression one of smug satisfaction, as if she were finally erasing the imperfection she had so long despised. By midday, the oak that had survived decades of storms, children climbing its branches, and generations of life was gone. The yard, once shaded and alive, now felt empty and scarred. The family stood devastated. Their children cried, neighbors whispered in shock, and even those who had once avoided conflict found themselves shaken by the destruction. Karen brushed aside the outrage. She declared the tree unsafe, a hazard to the community, and insisted she had acted in everyone's best interest. But her excuses were flimsy. There had been no safety inspections, no board votes, no county permits. She had acted alone, with reckless disregard for the law and for the rights of the family who owned the tree. For the homeowners, grief soon turned to resolve. They knew what Karen had done was more than an inconvenience. It was a violation of their property, their rights, and their memories. And though the oak was gone, something else had taken root that morning, a determination to hold Karen accountable, no matter how long it would take or how much resistance she threw their way. Stage was set. Karen believed the matter closed, but she had unknowingly started a battle that would shake the foundations of the HOA itself. In the days that followed, the absence of the oak was unbearable. Where once its branches stretched wide, only a barren patch of yard remained. The family sat on their porch each evening, staring at the empty space that seemed to echo with silence. Yet in that silence, their determination grew. Their first step was to file a formal complaint with the county's Environmental Enforcement Office. They knew cutting down a mature tree without a permit carried heavy penalties, sometimes in the tens of thousands of dollars. It didn't matter that Karen was HOA president. The law applied to her too. When the county inspector arrived, the evidence was impossible to deny. The family presented photographs of the tree, both before and after its destruction. They shared invoices left behind by the tree service company, clearly showing Karen's signature authorizing the work. An arborist confirmed in writing that the oak had been perfectly healthy, with no risk to property or safety. Neighbors quietly gave statements, many admitting they had seen Karen standing smugly as the tree was taken down. The inspector's report was damning. It concluded that the removal had been reckless, unauthorized, and in direct violation of local ordinances. The fines alone would be significant, but for the family, that wasn't enough. Karen had taken something irreplaceable, and simple punishment would not restore the balance. They wanted justice, and they wanted to ensure no one in the neighborhood would ever suffer under Karen's unchecked power again. That's when they sought legal counsel. Their attorney specialized in property disputes and HOA overreach, and together they crafted a lawsuit not just for damages but for restitution. If Karen claimed the tree was removed for the neighborhood, then the neighborhood itself should benefit. Their demand was bold. The HOA should be forced to plant dozens of new trees throughout the community, funded entirely by Karen's decision. When Karen received notice of the lawsuit, her confidence faltered for the first time. She tried to rally the board, but cracks began to show. Many members hadn't been consulted about the oak's removal and resented being dragged into her mess. Others feared being held personally liable. Still, Karen clung to arrogance. She believed her position, and bluster could shield her. But the family had evidence, the law on their side, and a growing undercurrent of support from neighbors who had long endured her authoritarian style. The storm was gathering, and Karen was standing in its path. The day the case reached court, the atmosphere was electric. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and residents slipped into the back rows of the courtroom, eager to witness the drama. The family's attorney laid out the story with precision. The oak had been healthy, protected, and beloved. It was destroyed without notice, without consent, and without legal authority. Photographs showed its beauty, now replaced by emptiness. The arborist's statement proved its health. The inspector's report labeled Karen's actions unlawful. Neighbors testified to its significance and to Karen's role in its removal. Karen's attorney struggled to defend her. They argued that she acted out of concern for safety, claiming the tree could have posed a hazard. But under questioning, their argument collapsed. There had been no inspections, no documentation, no board approval. Karen had acted alone, fueled not by safety but by her personal distaste. The judge listened carefully, weighing every piece of evidence. When the verdict came, it was clear and decisive. The HOA and its president, Karen, were found liable. They were fined heavily for violating county ordinances, but more importantly, they were ordered to provide restitution. The court mandated that the HOA, under Karen's leadership, fund the planting of a forest of new trees throughout the community. The irony was undeniable. Karen, who had despised one oak tree, would now be responsible for replacing it with dozens more. The family felt a surge of relief. Their fight had not been in vain. The oak was gone, but in its place would rise something greater, a living legacy that would forever remind the community of the cost of arrogance. For Karen, the blow was devastating. Her reputation was shattered, her finances strained, and her authority shaken. But the fallout was only beginning. News of the verdict spread like wildfire. What had once been whispered gossip at mailboxes was now open conversation on every street corner. For the first time, Karen was not feared but ridiculed. HOA meetings, once sparsely attended, now overflowed with homeowners eager to speak out. Residents who had suffered under Karen's petty fines and selective enforcement found their voices. Complaints poured in about years of overreach, about rules applied unfairly, about harassment disguised as community standards. The board, sensing the shift, began to distance themselves from her. Some openly questioned her leadership, while others whispered about replacing her altogether. Meanwhile, the county's restitution order came to life. Landscape crews arrived, planting saplings across parks, paths, and common areas, oaks, maples. and flowering trees soon dotted the neighborhood, each one funded by the HOA's budget as a direct consequence of Karen's reckless act. The irony was not lost on anyone. Karen, who despised the original oak, had unwittingly created a forest. Children ran between the new trees, neighbors admired the growing greenery, and the family who had fought so hard watched with satisfaction as justice took root. But Karen simmered with rage. Her power had been stripped, her reputation mocked, and her influence eroded. And when a petition circulated to formally remove her from office, the outcome was inevitable. At the vote, the community overwhelmingly cast her out. For Karen, it was the end of her reign. For the family, it was vindication. But the story was far from over. The fight for justice was only beginning. Life after her removal was a steady descent for Karen. Once feared, she was now an outcast. Neighbors avoided her, her name became a punchline, and her arrogance left her with no allies. The financial toll mounted quickly. The county fines drained. Her savings. The legal fees piled up. And though the HOA paid for the restitution, they refused to cover Karen's personal costs. She was left to shoulder the burden alone. Her once immaculate home began to show signs of neglect. The lawn grew, patchy. Weeds crept in and paint peeled from the shutters. The woman who once demanded perfection from others could no longer maintain her own facade. Meanwhile, the family thrived. Their victory became a local legend, covered by news outlets and celebrated as a story of justice against abuse of power. Messages poured in from strangers who had faced similar battles, thanking them for standing up. Every sapling planted stood as a symbol of their triumph. Each new leaf that unfurled was a reminder that arrogance comes at a cost. For Karen, that cost was everything: her authority, her reputation, her finances, and her pride. Rumors soon spread that she planned to sell her home and leave the neighborhood entirely. Some pitied her, others laughed, but most simply moved on, grateful for her absence. The oak was gone, but in its place stood something far more powerful, a lesson etched into the community's memory. Years passed, and the neighborhood transformed. The saplings that once looked fragile grew into strong, proud trees. Their branches stretched high, their leaves rustled in the wind, and their shade brought new life to the community. What began as destruction had blossomed into beauty. The HOA itself changed under new leadership. Meetings became collaborative rather than combative. Rules were applied fairly, with homeowners having a genuine voice in decisions. The oppressive atmosphere Karen had cultivated was gone, replaced by a sense of unity. The family often walked beneath the canopy of new trees, reflecting on how it all began. The loss of their oak had been painful, but in its place had grown something greater, a living legacy that would stand for generations. Karen's name faded into obscurity, remembered only as a cautionary tale. New residents learned of her only through stories, how she destroyed a beloved oak, how arrogance led to her downfall, and how the community rose against her abuse of power. But the trees remained. Every spring they blossomed, every summer. They shaded, every autumn they burned with color. Each one whispered the same truth. Arrogance falls, but resilience endures. The family no longer grieved the loss. Instead, they found comfort in the forest that stood as their victory. A forest Karen had paid for. A forest that would outlast her memory. A forest that turned injustice into justice. And so the story closed, not with bitterness, but with growth. What began with destruction had ended with renewal. What began with arrogance had ended with accountability. What began with one oak had grown into a forest of justice.